Welcome to the Climate Action Engine demonstration. The Climate Action Engine is a data and analytics platform developed through a partnership between Rocky Mountain Institute and Spherical Analytics that merges measured and modeled methane emissions data together with relevant industrial asset, financial, market, and environmental data. This demo will provide an overview of the engine, including its purpose, capabilities, and uses. First, why do we need the Climate Action Engine? Methane is a short-lived but powerful climate pollutant, and the natural gas sector is responsible for nearly 41 megatons of methane emissions per year, equivalent to 3.2 gigatons of CO2. To reduce these emissions, companies, investors, and policymakers need a trusted climate intelligence tool to provide undeniable, real-time climate data, informing decision-making and enabling impact. This data is then analyzed to generate actionable insights. The call to action must be explicit as well as easily digestible to motivate decisions and change behaviors in order to maximize impact. Let's dive into the platform itself now. This is the Map Explorer within Climate Action Engine. Much of the data ingested so far has focused on the prolific Permian Basin in Texas, due to the scale and growth of production operations in this basin. We elevated this area as a test case to define and develop specific functions for the Climate Action Engine. We will update the Climate Action Engine on a rolling basis and will soon expand coverage nationally and globally. We are also actively developing additional advanced analytics and dashboard views. Let's spend the next few minutes going into a number of data layers that have already been added to the engine and talking through some key points and targeted use cases. The layer menu along the left side of the page allows users to add or remove featured layers to the map. Layers are grouped by theme. Groupings include assets or physical equipment such as wells, pipelines, and processing plants, ESG events as reported to regulatory agencies, satellite sensor data, aerial sensor data, and risks to fixed assets. Let's go through each group in turn. The boundaries are very straightforward and include Texas counties, oil and gas districts, and basin maps for all primary tight shale oil and gas plays across the U.S. Clicking on any element of a data layer will bring up its associated data table as shown here. The ESG layers include reported environmental accidents such as spills, blowouts, and flaring. The self-reported flaring layer gives us our first look at the trusted timeline. Utilizing the trusted timeline, users can view an immutable historical record over time for certain layers. To isolate a time period of interest, simply click and drag the mouse within the timeline from the desired start to desired end dates, or enter specific time periods of interest such as operational quarters or fiscal years. The aerial sensor layers include data from flyovers. Flyovers using hyperspectral sensors provide elevated methane concentrations with high spatial resolution that can give more detail than satellite data. We have aerial flyover data at a geospatial resolution of 5 meters by 5 meters and a methane detection threshold below 20 kilograms per hour, which allows methane emissions to be tied to a particular well pad under favorable weather conditions. Private users of CAE will be able to upload their own flyover data from aircraft or drones to complement the publicly available data streams. Next are the satellite sensors. Currently, we have data from VIIRS and TRPOMI. The VIIRS satellite, operated by NOAA, produces data that can be used to identify flare activities. This allows for comparison of self-reported well flaring against flaring detected by VIIRS. I'll talk more about this insight later. The second satellite, TRPOMI, operated by the Netherlands, is a methane sensing satellite that can differentiate elevated methane emissions in the atmosphere. The data is displayed as a grid with 7 kilometer by 7 kilometer blocks colored by methane intensity. We will continue adding more satellites as soon as they're launched or the data becomes available. Next, the asset layers include all primary oil and gas operating assets analyzed within the platform, including oil wells, gas wells, pipelines, natural gas processing plants, and underground storage. The oil and gas well layers display over 433,000 active wells across the state of Texas. In line with common industry practice, wells classified as oil wells are shown in green, while wells classified as gas wells are shown in red. Zooming in on the map allows users to drill in with high resolution, viewing all the way down to a single well pad, operating asset, or adjacent community potentially impacted by local industrial activities. Selecting any of the displayed assets will open up an extensive collection of information regarding the asset design, operation, including historical production of data for water, oil, and gas, as well as information about the owner or operator. Lastly, we have a menu for risks to fixed assets. Currently, this layer can be used to assess the potential risk for coastal flooding to impact production operations and consequently operating cash flows. As tropical systems increase in intensity due to climate change, FEMA is updating flood hazard maps along the Gulf Coast. This analysis can help investors identify which operators have the highest climate risk exposure, or help operators evaluate which lease or asset holdings to maintain or divest. Our roadmap includes expanding this type of changing climate risk layers to include other physical risk factors, such as wildfire potential or earthquake risk, especially for regions where hydraulic fracturing is common. To help users start making sense of all this data, the engine allows users to search or filter for specific assets. For example, we can locate and identify a specific asset or group of assets using an asset identifier, such as finding a well using the Texas Railroad Commission lease ID or API number. Alternatively, you can filter visible asset layers to show all assets owned by a given operator or exhibiting certain operating behaviors, like high or low production, gas-oil ratio, or methane emissions intensity. For example, an operator could easily filter for their own assets and then apply the satellite and flyover layers to highlight emissions relevant to their own production. Now let's shift gears slightly and walk through some of the insights the CAE provides today. First is the methane intensity of operators in a given region. By looking at the EPA basins and then clicking on the summary in the data table, we can see the methane intensity for the top 10 best and worst operators in the Permian. Note that this intensity is currently calculated from the reported numbers to the EPA. Nonetheless, we can look across related data sets like flyover surveys and the Tropomi satellite to evaluate whether external measurements match the reported numbers. Over time, calculated methane intensities will incorporate more and more measured data as measurement technologies evolve and standards and certifications for low methane gas require more monitoring technologies. Second, building off of my comment earlier on comparing self-reported and measured data, we can analyze self-reported flaring against VEERS data and show where there are discrepancies and how large they are. By adding both data layers, it's easy to see how these numbers compare. We can then further select a specific time period from the trusted timeline and even drill down to a single well pad. Finally, the Climate Action Engine can show the production at risk from physical climate change impacts, in this case from flooding. This analysis pulls in data on which wells are in flood zones, their production numbers, as well as the probability of a flood shutting down production over a specified time frame. That concludes the Climate Action Engine demo. Feel free to reach out to our team at the email address listed here to learn more about how your teams can access Climate Action Engine capabilities, contribute data, or engage our teams in an implementation configured specifically for your company. Thank you.